Alright, I'm back with another video for social work, and this one is about domestic violence and children. So I do have notes that I have been keeping over the last month or so that I wanted to use. Dropping my water. Um, that I wanted to use whenever I make this video. So I'm going to talk about domestic violence and children because if you watch my last video, you know that I experienced domestic violence in the home as a child growing up, and I talk about it because it's part of my testimony, I suppose. But anyway, so domestic violence and children. And I wanted to make this video because I work with clients who are victims of domestic violence every single day, and they have children who are also victims of domestic violence. If you live in the state of South Carolina, and I don't know what the laws are for other states in the nation, but in South Carolina, our governor last summer, she signed into law this new amendments to our domestic violence laws. And so before, children were not victims or listed as victims in incident reports whenever they were present in an altercation of domestic violence between their parents in the home. Now they are listed as victims, and I think it's because it's easier for them to get services that way if they are listed as victims. So in the state of South Carolina, if a child is in the area, home, next room, anywhere in the vicinity of a domestic violence altercation, they are victims of domestic violence, which is great. Well, not great in that sense that it happened, but great that they're listed as victims because they can get the services they need. So, the first thing I wanted to do is talk about how children react to domestic violence. And so, this is just based off my experience. So, if you want to know more about that law in South Carolina for domestic violence, I will try to put the link to those amendments in the space below, so you can read for yourself what it is. But all this will be based off my own experience and practice. It's not anything evidence-based or researched or anything like that, but this is just based off my experience. So I'm not quoting anything, I'm not referring to anything or using any specific source in this video. So anyway, how do children react to domestic violence? It depends on a lot of different things. Every child is different, every person is different, so everyone will have a different reaction. But things that can have an impact on that reaction is the child's age, the child's experience in life in general, as well as experience with domestic violence in the past. Somebody is texting me. Okay, we'll leave that alone. Any prior trauma that they may have had in the past with other issues like sexual abuse or physical abuse bestowed upon themselves. What else? Their demeanor and their temper and things like that. All of those are things that will affect the way a child can react to domestic violence. So we'll start first by talking about the child's age. So obviously, if a child is an infant or a toddler and they are, I would say, under the age of 2 or 3, they may or may not remember domestic violence, specifically if it's not something that's long term. Like, say there's only one incident, and the child is 2 years old or 1 year old, then they probably won't remember it in the future. But if a child, let's say from birth until age 5, if they constantly experience domestic violence, that's something that will stay with that child, especially if they've always seen it from birth to age 5, because they will have a reaction to it. They may become hypervigilant all the time, and just, if you slam a book down, it might scare them. It's just different things like that. And then you have, if a child is older, say 12 or 13, and they're always experiencing domestic violence, that's going to have a different impact on them than it would on a child that's 1 or 2 years old. So age plays a factor. Again, their experience with their just regular day-to-day life experience. If they live in a home that's not well kept, if they live somewhere where they don't have adequate food and clothes and shelter and education, if their needs are being neglected, they will have a different experience to how they react to domestic violence, because of all the other factors that play into that situation. They will have a different experience and a different impact on that child than it would for someone who's in a more stable home. And then also, if the child is experiencing abuse, him or herself, as well as seeing the parents fight, then it will have a different kind of effect on them than it would for some child who's not experiencing domestic violence themselves. So if a child is seeing their parent being beat and then they're being beat also, that is just, it's trauma on top of trauma, and that will carry with that child pretty much for the rest of their lives if they don't get any help. Okay, I had to pause the video just then for a second, but the next thing I was going to talk about is the child's temperament, or their demeanor and how they would normally react to certain situations. Sorry. Sorry, y'all. But so if a child is always angry already from other things that he or she may be experiencing, if you add in domestic violence to that, that's just going to make the child even more angry. Or if a child is very shy and quiet and isolates him or herself, they may continue to withdraw and isolate themselves from people if they are experiencing domestic violence in the home. Also, the distance that the child is from the altercation also plays a role in how it affects the child. So and I said in my last video, as a child, I would sit in the closet with my sister, and we would have the cordless phone as children, and we would hear my mom and dad fighting, and we would be so afraid to call 911 because my parents taught us how to call 911, how to escape the house if there was a fire and stuff like that. So we knew how to call, but we were so afraid. And I just remember sitting in the closet listening to the thumping and the just bumping and stuff like that. So we never really saw it, but we heard it. And so it never really affected me until I was about, and my mom left my dad when I was about 6 or so. And it wasn't an every night thing, but it happened often enough for me to remember it. But I remember when I was about 16 or 17, I was on the phone with my little boyfriend in high school, and you know you're just sitting on the phone when you're in high school, used to be back in the days, not saying anything on the phone and just holding the phone, and he was watching a movie, and I heard this woman scream, and immediately it triggered me, and I went back to sitting in that closet listening to the screams, and it scared me because it never happened before. I mean, this is like 10, 11, 12 years later. So that's an example, but we were in the closet and we didn't see it. But a child who has firsthand, like a front row seat to it, it would affect them differently. Maybe they may have triggers before 10, 11, or 12 years go by. Maybe they might start experiencing some PTSD way sooner, or they may have, you know, thoughts or visions or just anything that reminds them of what happened. So, or, you know, if a kid is in the room and they're listening to music to cover up the noise because they know that something is happening, it might not have that big of an effect on them as a kid who's just sitting there listening to that every night. But it's also just all about perception and how a kid perceives an incident that they witness. So, you know, if violence is normal in the everyday thing amongst everybody in the household, then they may feel like it's normal. I feel like I said something wrong there. If violence is normal in the home and they see it all the time, it might not have an effect on the child because they think that it's normal, is what I'm trying to say. But if a child has never experienced domestic violence, let's say that the mom and dad, or the parents, because it could be a dad and a dad or a mom and a mom, we want to be inclusive of everybody. Let's say that the parents were together, never had any kind of domestic violence. The child had a pretty stable life up until, let's say, age 7, and then the parent got into a new relationship with someone else, and then all of a sudden the violence starts. So that would be different for a child who has never witnessed any domestic violence, and then all of a sudden hears the parents fighting all the time. That's going to have a different effect on that child. So it's all about perception and age and experience and things like that. Let's see, let me check my notes. So I'm going to just talk about, you know, some of the responses that a child can have to witnessing domestic violence. So like I said before, the child can be hypervigilant, just any little thing. If a door is slammed, the book is slammed, just any noise, they might have a physical reaction where they become hypervigilant, their adrenaline is running, heart starts beating fast because they feel like they're in danger. It's the whole fight or flight kind of thing. They may have PTSD, like I said, and just start re-experiencing the sounds, the sights, you know, that kind of thing, or smells. You know, some people use things like fire in domestic violence. You know, they burn you with cigarettes and do all kinds of other things, and if a child is witnessing that, a smell could also trigger them. If they're going through any kind of post-traumatic stress disorder. A child may isolate themselves. They may avoid being around the abusive parent. They may avoid any interaction with both parents, and they just may feel just numb and they just want to escape, and so they may try to find ways to cope that are unhealthy, like doing drugs or fighting or acting out themselves and that kind of thing. I can give you an example. I was working with a client last year where the mom and dad were fighting. The dad was choking the mom, pulling her by her hair, and the child was, I believe, 9 years old, and he was witnessing all of this stuff. And so he had the phone to call 911. The dad actually hit him. He managed to run away to a neighbor's house and still end up calling 911. And you know, it's very traumatic for him, but he started blaming his mom because the dad was in jail and he was used to seeing his dad, and so he would blame the mom and, you know, tell her that he hated her. I think she told me that he started wetting the bed and he hadn't done that before. So it's just different kind of reactions that kids can have depending on all of those factors: their age, their experience, the proximity that they are, the distance that they are from the violence, and things like that. So, you know, they could possibly have trouble sleeping. And even sometimes, you know, children learn through modeling. You learn that in social work school as well. So, I mean, they could be playing with their toys and acting out what they saw between parents if they actually witnessed the abuse firsthand. Some of the long-term effects that domestic violence can have on children. Again, they could start using substances and alcohol. They could become depressed. They might have a low self-esteem. They may start withdrawing. They may become suicidal or homicidal. They can have self-destructive behavior and start cutting themselves, and they may have more likely to become criminals and, you know, just act out and do a lot of things that they normally wouldn't do had they not witnessed domestic violence. And I'm going to pause right here because I need to plug up the laptop because the battery's going dead. So hang on one moment. Okay, and so that's pretty much that. So how can we as practitioners help the child to recover from domestic violence or witnessing domestic violence? We need to make sure that the family has a good support system in place. We can make sure, first of all, that the child is in a safe environment, and the family, the parent who's being abused, all of the family are in a safe place. So we need to make sure that there are shelters that they can be referred to. Most shelters, and I've worked at a shelter before, they are in a private location where people don't know where it is. They don't have a mailing address most of the time. They use a P.O. box. They don't have a street address, rather. They give you a code name at some of these shelters. So if the victim wants to receive calls, she has to give out the code name. They also have curfews and things like that to keep the family safe and the staff as well safe. So we need to make sure that the child can have counseling and whatever other resources that the child and the family need. So that's how we can help the family in the immediate aftermath of domestic violence, is providing shelter and resources for counseling and other community resources for housing, financial assistance, and things like that. Also, I guess providing a mentor maybe for the child, someone that can take them out and spend time with them and kind of coach them and be there for them if they don't have anybody to talk to outside of counseling. As a parent, and I don't have any children, but I'm just speaking from my experience and practice. Parents often wonder what they can tell their child, how they can get their child to cope and to deal with the domestic violence. And so Sometimes parents are in denial that their children witnessed anything. Sometimes they say, "Oh, well, they were asleep." Well, if you're getting beaten and things are being thrown, glasses are being broken, even if a child was asleep, maybe they woke up from all the noise. So we don't really know a lot of times what all children witness. So I always advise parents to talk to the child without exposing too much information. Ask the child if they saw anything, if they heard anything. Talk to them about how they feel. Let them know that it's not their fault, that it's not the parent who's being abused fault, and let them know that it's okay for them to still have a relationship with the parent who is the abuser. Let them know that they don't have to hate the parent who is an abuser, and even get them to write a poem, get them to draw a picture, and just assure the child that it's not their fault, mainly because a lot of children will blame themselves for domestic violence or for parents separating from each other. Try not to make the video too long. Let me look at my notes again, make sure I'm not leaving anything out. Let's see. I think that's pretty much it for now, since this video is 20 minutes long. So if y'all have any questions about anything dealing with children and domestic violence, just let me know. If I can be more specific about anything, let me know. Please subscribe. I have more videos on the way. I will be making a video on the Code of Ethics. So I did print the Code of Ethics out. I'm going to read over it again before I make the video. So I'll probably make it within the next few days. And, just to make sure that I can write down some more notes and cover everything thoroughly. So any questions, let me know. You can send me an email. And hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you next video.